The Memory Garden of Echoes, Chapter 1. My husband Arthur was a brilliant man, but undeniably eccentric. A software engineer by trade, he had a mind that perpetually tinkered, seeing connections where others saw only chaos. When he passed away last year, leaving behind a silence that still echoed in our large, quiet house, I inherited not just his sprawling collection of rare books and vinyl records, but also his laboratory, a converted sunroom overflowing with wires.
That sounds like you whispered.
Circuit boards and half-finished inventions. I'm Evelyn, 60 years old, and now navigating widowhood meant navigating Arthur's unfinished dreams. Among his many peculiar contraptions, one stood out, a sleek, almost futuristic console he'd cryptically referred to as the Chronos Projector. He'd hinted at its purpose only vaguely. It's about making the past accessible, Ev. Not just static images, but the very essence of memory. I'd humored him, assuming it was another of his grand theoretical ventures that would never quite materialize. Now, dusting it off, I felt a pang of guilt for my skepticism. It had a single slot for various media, old VHS tapes, audio cassettes, even a curious port for what looked like ancient floppy disks. The central screen was dark, waiting. I decided to try it. I wasn't looking for grand revelations, just a way to feel closer to Arthur, to understand his genius, perhaps even to find a hidden message from him. I gathered a stack of our old family VHS tapes, my children's first steps, our anniversaries, Christmas mornings, mundane, beautiful memories. I slid the first tape into the slot. The machine whirred, a soft mechanical hum. The screen flickered to life, showing static, then a grainy image of our youngest son, Daniel, as a toddler, giggling in a sandbox. It worked. Arthur's eccentric contraption actually worked. I felt a surge of warmth, a bittersweet joy, but as I cycled through more tapes, the projector began to behave strangely. It would occasionally jam, then reset, and the screen would flash snippets of something unfamiliar before returning to my chosen tape. It was like a brief, ghostly interference. Puzzled, I checked the input slot. Tucked deep inside, almost out of sight, was a very old, unlabeled audio cassette wedged against the mechanism. It was unlike any cassette I owned, a drab, generic gray, scuffed and worn. I carefully pried it out. There was no label, no handwriting, just a faint, almost invisible scratch on one side, barely distinguishable. Curiosity piqued. I inserted this mysterious cassette. The Chronos Projector hummed differently this time, a deeper, more resonant vibration. The screen remained dark for a moment, then pulsed with a soft, green light. Instead of static, intricate patterns of light and shadow began to coalesce, forming abstract, fluid shapes. This wasn't a standard playback. Then a sound. Not a clear voice, but the distant, tinkling laughter of a child, accompanied by the faint, almost ethereal melody of a lullaby. My breath hitched. It was a tune I knew, a lullaby my own mother, Eleanor, used to sing to me, but only when she thought I was asleep. A private, haunting melody she never sang during the day. She would hum it softly, a tune filled with a quiet sorrow and always puzzled me as a child. The images on the screen sharpened. They weren't distinct, but fractured, like broken glass. I saw a fleeting glimpse of a lush, overgrown garden, vibrant, with old-fashioned roses. Then a slender hand reaching out, blurred and indistinct, a silhouette of a woman, her back to the viewer, standing amidst the roses. And then a small, quick movement. A child, just a flash of a tiny figure, disappearing behind a dense rose bush. The projector whirred louder, then suddenly shut down. The screen going black, the room falling silent. I sat in the dim light, my heart pounding. This wasn't just a glitch. This was a message. Arthur, in his final project, had somehow left me a path to a hidden past, a past intertwined with my own mother and a secret child. The child's laughter, the lullaby, the woman in the rose garden. It felt deeply, intimately familiar, yet utterly unknown. My mother, Eleanor, had always been a private woman, especially about her early life. She rarely spoke of her childhood or her parents, my grandparents. Any questions were met with a polite but firm change of subject. As I grew older, I sensed a deep, unspoken sadness within her, a wall she rarely allowed anyone to breach. Could this cassette, this memory garden of echoes, be connected to that hidden sadness? The very next day, driven by an urgent need for answers, I returned to Arthur's lab. I found an old, tattered notebook, tucked beneath a stack of his engineering journals. It wasn't his usual meticulous logbook. This one was filled with loose sketches, poetic musings, and disjointed notes. One page, half torn, had a rough drawing of the Chronos Projector, and scrawled beneath it, "The echoes are strong in the places of forgotten joy. Look for the roots. The garden remembers. The garden remembers." The image of the rose garden from the projector flashed in my mind. Was this a real place? A place from my mother's past? I had to find out. Arthur, in his own eccentric way, was guiding me, even from beyond. This wasn't just about understanding his last invention. It was about unearthing a truth that had been buried for generations, a truth that somehow held a lost child and a hidden song. Chapter 2. The mysterious audio cassette, coupled with Arthur's cryptic notebook entry, had pulled me deep into a forgotten corner of my family's past. The garden remembers. The fragment of the rose garden, the child's laughter, and my mother Eleanor's haunting lullaby from the Chronos Projector had awakened a fierce determination in me. My mother, usually so guarded about her early life, had always carried a quiet sorrow, a wall I could never breach. Could this memory garden hold the key to her hidden grief? I returned to Arthur's lab, poring over his notes on the Chronos Projector. He had filled dozens of pages with complex algorithms, quantum physics theories, and philosophical musings on memory and time. One diagram, more detailed than the others, showed a conceptual memory reconstruction process. It wasn't just playing back recordings, it was attempting to recreate moments, piecing together sensory data with emotional resonance. This explained the fragmented, almost dreamlike quality of the images. He believed that certain frequencies, certain emotional imprints, could be reconstructed from even the most degraded media. The unlabeled cassette, I now realized, wasn't just a tape. It was an emotional blueprint. My research began with my mother, Eleanor. I went through old family albums again, this time with a new, urgent eye. I focused on her childhood photos, searching for any clues about a particular garden or any unfamiliar faces. There were many photos of her as a young girl, always posed, always smiling, but none showed a clear, distinct garden that matched the one I glimpsed on the projector. However, one photo, tucked away in a brittle envelope, showed Eleanor, perhaps around 10 years old, holding hands with a slightly younger girl. The girl's face was obscured by a fold in the photo, but her small hand clutched a tiny wooden bird. This was a new face, an unfamiliar child. My mother never spoke of a childhood friend or relative like this. I also remembered a curious detail from my mother's effects. A small pressed rose, its petals faded to a dusty pink, carefully preserved between the pages of her favorite poetry book. It smelled faintly of earth and old paper. The rose garden. The connection felt undeniable. Simultaneously, I researched the lullaby. The melody was distinct, a blend of melancholic beauty and yearning. I hummed it to myself, then used an online melody recognition tool. After several attempts, the tool identified it as an old Scottish folk lullaby, the Bonnie Banks of Loch Lomond, but with slightly altered lyrics. My mother's side of the family had no known Scottish heritage. This was another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, pointing to an unknown connection. Back in Arthur's lab, I set up the Chronos Projector again. The unlabeled cassette was still jammed in the slot. This time, I didn't try to remove it. Instead, I focused my intention, speaking softly to Arthur, to the machine, to the unseen forces guiding me. "Show me more," I whispered. "Show me the garden." The projector whirred to life again, the green light pulsing. The images were still fragmented, but clearer now. The rose garden, vast and untamed, with a winding stone path. The woman with the slender hand, her face still obscured, but her posture familiar, almost regal. And the child. This time, the child was clearer. A little girl, perhaps 3 or 4, with bright, curious eyes and a shock of fiery red hair, playing near an old stone bench. The laughter, previously faint, was stronger, more joyful. The lullaby, too, was more distinct, sung by a gentle female voice, not my mother's, but similar in its melodic quality. Then the most shocking image yet. A quick flash of the woman's face. It was my mother, Eleanor, younger, much younger than I'd ever seen her in photos. Her face softened by youth, her eyes filled with a deep, overflowing love. But it was her, and she was looking directly at the little girl with red hair. This was impossible. My mother had only 2 children, my older brother James and me. No other siblings, no lost children she ever mentioned. Yet the love in her eyes, the intimacy of the seeing, screamed of a parental bond. The projector abruptly cut out, leaving me breathless, the ghost of a child's laughter hanging in the air. My mind reeled. Was this a lost sibling of mine? Or was it a child my mother had before her marriage to my father? A secret kept hidden from everyone? The memory garden was revealing a truth too profound to ignore. I now understood Arthur's final project. He wasn't just playing back recordings. He was reconstructing memories, emotions, moments of lost time. He had known about this secret, perhaps even discovered it himself, and had built this device as his final gift to me, a way to uncover a truth he couldn't simply tell me. The lullaby, the red-haired child, the deeply buried past, They were all threads leading to a devastatingly beautiful truth. I had to find this child, this woman with red hair, this secret hidden in the garden of my mother's past. The next step was to identify the specific rose garden, the location of this hidden memory, and to delve deeper into my mother's early life, seeking any living relatives or old friends who might hold another piece of this bewildering puzzle. The Chronos Projector had opened a door, and now I had to walk through it, no matter how painful the revelations might be. Chapter 3. The Chronos Projector, Arthur's extraordinary device, had just revealed a devastating truth. My mother, Eleanor, as a young woman, lovingly gazing at a red-haired child, a child who was clearly not me or my brother. The intense emotional resonance of the scene, the haunting lullaby, and the memory garden imagery now screamed of a hidden child, a secret buried deep within my family's past. My initial shock quickly gave way to a fierce determination to uncover the full story. Arthur, in his brilliant silent way, was guiding me through the echoes of time. I needed more specific information about the rose garden. The projector's image, though fleeting, had offered some clues. An old stone bench, a particular type of climbing rose, and what looked like a distinctive stone wall in the background. I spent hours poring over old landscape books and horticultural guides, trying to match the specific rose varieties. It was a long shot, but I felt driven. While doing this, I remembered an old box of my mother's keepsakes, tucked away in the attic. Among antique lace and faded photographs, I found a small, leather-bound journal. It wasn't a diary, but a garden journal in which my mother had meticulously pressed various flowers and leaves, making small notes. The entries were mostly botanical, but one page dated 1948, the year before she met my father, had a single pressed red rose next to a brief, almost illegible entry: Rosemary's Garden, Little Wren, my last goodbye. Rosemary's Garden, Little Wren, my last goodbye. And the words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The red-haired child must be Little Wren, and Rosemary's Garden was the name of the place, not just a descriptive phrase. The red rose. It all connected. I immediately researched Rosemary's Garden in our state, particularly in the region where my mother grew up. To my surprise, I found an old faded newspaper clipping from 1950, describing Rosemary's Garden, orphanage and home for unwed mothers. It was located in a rural, secluded area, operating discreetly for decades before its eventual closure in the late 1960s. The article also mentioned a fire that had destroyed many of its records in the 1970s, explaining why I'd never found official traces before. My heart ached. My mother, Eleanor, had given up a child for adoption, a child named Little Wren. The silence, the deep-seated sorrow she carried, it all made tragic sense now. She had carried this immense secret alone for decades, perhaps believing it was for the best, or that society would never understand. I took the small, unlabeled cassette and the garden journal back to Arthur's lab. This time, as I inserted the cassette, I placed the journal on the projector's console. The machine pulsed with a brilliant, almost blinding green light. The screen dissolved into a swirling vortex of colors, then solidified into an incredibly vivid, almost holographic projection. It was the rose garden, but clearer, sharper, as if I were standing there. The woman, My mother, Eleanor, was there, kneeling by the stone bench. The little girl, little Wren, with her fiery red hair and bright eyes, was playing nearby, humming the very lullaby I had heard. Eleanor's face, etched with a mixture of love and pain, slowly turned towards the camera, her eyes glistening. She began to speak, her voice soft, filled with a heartbreaking tenderness. "My dearest Wren, my sweet little bird, I know I cannot keep you. The world, it's not ready for us. They will never understand. But I promise you, my heart will always carry your song. You are my sunshine, my secret garden. Never forget how much your mother loves you. I hope, I pray you find happiness. Find a loving home, a family that can give you everything I cannot. This garden will always remember us, our final moments. My precious Wren, goodbye." The projection faded slowly, leaving me breathless, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just a recording, it was an emotional echo. A reconstructed memory imbued with Eleanor's very essence, her pain, her love, her desperate goodbye. Arthur had built a machine that could tap into the profound emotional imprints left on objects and spaces, reconstructing a truth more powerful than any recording. He had known somehow, and had wanted me to know. Little Wren, my half-sister, a secret daughter, given up for adoption, her existence erased from our family history. The question was, who was she now? If she was born in 1948, she would be in her late 70s. Had she found happiness? Did she ever wonder about her birth mother? The next step was clear. I had to find little Wren. Rosemary's Garden Orphanage was the key. Despite the fire, there might be surviving registers, or even former staff members or adoptees who remembered. Arthur's Chronos Projector had revealed the profound, hidden sorrow of my mother's life. Now it was guiding me to heal a century-old wound and find a lost branch of our family tree, a sister I never knew I had. Chapter 4. The Chronos Projector had not just revealed a hidden memory, it had opened a direct portal to my mother, Eleanor's deepest sorrow. The painful goodbye to her secret daughter, little Wren, given up for adoption at Rosemary's Garden Orphanage in 1948. The raw emotion of Eleanor's reconstructed farewell, her voice aching with love and despair, reverberated in my study, leaving me breathless. This was not a mere secret. It was a profound, unspoken tragedy that had shaped my mother's entire life. Arthur's final gift, his Chronos Projector, was less an invention and more a testament to his understanding of the silent burdens we carry, a tool for healing the past. My mother's garden journal, with its single pressed red rose and the words "Rosemary's Garden, Little Wren, my last goodbye," was now a sacred text, a tangible link to a story that needed to be fully told. My half-sister, little Wren, would be in her late 70s now. I felt an urgent, almost spiritual calling to find her. My search for little Wren began with Rosemary's Garden Orphanage. Despite the fire that had supposedly destroyed many records in the 1970s, I knew that even the most determined attempts to erase the past often left faint traces. I started by contacting the local historical society in the rural area where the orphanage once stood. They confirmed the fire, but mentioned that some archived materials, including partial intake registers and staff payrolls, had been rescued and were housed in the county archives. A few days later, armed with my newfound knowledge and a sense of profound anticipation, I found myself in the dimly lit county archives, surrounded by dusty boxes of records. After hours of careful searching, I found it, a partial intake register from Rosemary's Garden, dated 1948. Under the entry for baby girl, received on July 14th, 1948, was the name, given name, Wren, adoptive name, Elizabeth Willow. A small note beside it read, adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Willow, Willow Creek, October 1948. Strong, healthy child, known for her red hair and bright disposition. Elizabeth Willow. The name was like a beacon in the darkness. Willow Creek, a nearby town. Strong, healthy child, known for her red hair and bright disposition. It was her. My little Wren had found a home, and she was healthy, bright, a wave of relief, mixed with sorrow for Eleanor's loss, washed over me. My next step was to trace Elizabeth Willow. Genealogical databases proved invaluable. I quickly found a marriage record for Elizabeth Willow to a George Miller in 1970. Further searches led me to an address in a neighboring state and a phone number for Elizabeth Miller, now in her late 70s. My hand trembled as I dialed. What do you say to a sister you never knew existed? A sister whose very existence was a decades-long secret. A kind, clear voice answered. Hello, this is Elizabeth Miller. Hello, Elizabeth, I began, my voice a little shaky. My name is Evelyn Vance. This might sound incredibly strange, but I believe we might be related. My mother was Eleanor Vance, and I've recently uncovered something astonishing about her past and a daughter she had before her marriage. There was a long silence on the other end, then a soft, breathy gasp. Eleanor? My birth mother? I knew I was adopted. My adoptive parents. Thomas and Mary Willow were wonderful, but they always said my birth mother was a kind woman who loved me very much but couldn't keep me. They mentioned her name once, Eleanor, and they said she had a special song she sang, the lullaby, the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. Yes, I whispered, she did. It was her private lullaby, and you were her little Wren. Elizabeth began to weep softly, a sound of profound release. Little Wren, that's what my adoptive mother used to call me when I was very small. She said it was a nickname my birth mother had for me. How did you know? I recounted the entire story. Arthur's Chronos Projector, the mysterious cassette, the haunting memory of the rose garden, my mother's journal, Rosemary's Garden, and the name Elizabeth Willow. I explained how Arthur, in his final brilliance, had created a way for me to find this hidden truth, a path through the echoes of the past. Elizabeth was overwhelmed, but incredibly open. She shared stories of her life, her loving adoptive parents, her own children and grandchildren. She had had a happy life, but always with a quiet, persistent yearning to know her origins. She had even tried to find her birth mother years ago. But the fire at Rosemary's Garden had thwarted her efforts. We talked for hours, bridging 70-plus years of silence. Elizabeth still had a shock of vibrant red hair, now streaked with silver. Her eyes, bright and curious, held a familiar spark, a spark I now recognized as Eleanor's. She even confessed to a lifelong affinity for growing roses, though she never knew why. Her own small garden was filled with them. The memory garden had truly manifested in her life. We arranged to meet. When I finally embraced Elizabeth, my half-sister, it was a moment of profound, indescribable joy and sorrow. Joy for the connection found, sorrow for the decades lost. and for Eleanor, who had carried her secret love to her grave. I introduced Elizabeth to my brother James and to my own children and grandchildren. The family tree, once seemingly complete, expanded with new branches, new stories, and new love. Elizabeth, our little Wren, was finally home. Her song, once whispered in a forgotten garden, now echoing loudly and clearly through our reunited family. Arthur's final invention, a tool for memory, had not just preserved the past, it had healed the present, proving that some connections are so profound they can transcend time and silence. Chapter 5. The reunion with Elizabeth, my half-sister, my mother Eleanor's little Wren, brought an indescribable sense of completeness to my life and to our family. Arthur's Chronos Projector, that eccentric device, had not merely played back memories. It had actively sculpted a path to healing, using the echoes of the past to mend the present. The first embrace with Elizabeth was a cascade of emotions: joy for the found connection, sorrow for the decades lost, and a profound, aching understanding of my mother Eleanor's silent grief. Elizabeth, vibrant and warm despite her past, immediately became a beloved presence in our lives. She shared stories of her adoptive parents, the Willows, who had given her a loving, stable home. While she knew she was adopted, they had protected her from the stigma of illegitimacy, offering only vague, kind reassurances about her birth mother. She spoke of her own journey, her successful career as a teacher, her children and grandchildren, all thriving. Hearing her story, I saw how Eleanor's desperate act of love had indeed given little Wren a good life, a future she might not have had in the stifling societal norms of the 1940s. The Chronos Projector, now a revered artifact in Arthur's lab, continued to hold a quiet power. I often returned to it, not to seek new secrets, but to replay the reconstructed memory of Eleanor's goodbye to little Wren. Each time, the depth of my mother's love, her profound pain, and her courage became more palpable. It was a tangible link to a woman I had thought I knew completely, revealing a hidden reservoir of strength and sacrifice. The machine, Arthur's final brilliant act, had been more than just a piece of technology. It was a testament to his understanding that true memory encompasses emotion, not just data. He had seen beyond the surface, recognizing the need for these buried truths to emerge for healing. Elizabeth, in turn, shared with us her own lifelong connection to the rose garden. Her passion for gardening, particularly for cultivating old-fashioned roses, was something she'd pursued unknowingly, feeling an almost spiritual pull to them. Her own garden was a testament to this, blooming with varieties that closely resembled those glimpsed in Eleanor's reconstructed memory. It was as if Rosemary's garden, the place of her painful goodbye, had imprinted itself on her soul, manifesting as a deep, subconscious yearning for roots and connection. We held a family gathering, bringing together all branches of our now expanded family. My brother James, initially stunned by the revelation of a half-sister, embraced Elizabeth with tears in his eyes. My children and grandchildren welcomed their new aunt and cousins with open arms, fascinated by the extraordinary story that brought them together. The event wasn't just a reunion. It was a celebration of resilience, of hidden love, and of the profound interconnectedness of lives across generations. We spoke of Eleanor, not with judgment, but with a new, profound understanding and empathy for the impossible choices she faced. Her secret, once a source of potential shame, became a story of immense love and sacrifice. The memory garden of echoes had truly blossomed. It wasn't merely a physical place, but a metaphorical space within our family's collective consciousness, where lost memories were recovered and fragmented lives were made whole. The Chronos Projector, Arthur's enduring legacy, had taught me that the past isn't just a series of events. It's a living, breathing tapestry, woven with emotion, silent choices, and enduring love. Sometimes the most profound truths lie not in dusty archives or official records, but in the echoes of memory, waiting for a compassionate heart and the right catalyst to bring them to light. My life, once quiet and reflective, was now vibrant, filled with the warmth of new family connections and the ongoing discovery of stories that continued to enrich our shared history. The process of uncovering little Wren's story had not only brought me a sister, but had transformed my understanding of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that tie us across generations, even when separated by time, distance, and the weight of unspoken secrets. Arthur's final invention, a tool for memory, had become a conduit for reconciliation, proving that some connections are so profound they can transcend even death, reaching out from the echoes of the past to bring healing and completeness to the present. The memory garden would forever be a place of quiet remembrance and profound reunited love.